Welcome on to Democracy with FP Wellman. I am FP Wellman here for another episode this week as we're getting ready for the midterms. Freaking 6 days out. No stress in my life at all, I assure you that. Hey, we're coming to you from the beautiful bucolic suburbs of St. Louis, Missouri, Creve Coeur to be precise. As always, the podcast is sponsored by our friends at Vi Media. Vi Media is an award-winning digital marketing agency in the greater St. Louis area. And you're your marketing partner for, that generates real proven growth for a variety of industries right here in St. Louis and nationwide. They can serve all your digital marketing needs. The easy way to get hold of them is vi.media. That's VIE.media on the web. Go there, check them out. They're great folks. They've been hooking me up. I hope you'll check them out. Man, like I said, crazy week. It's been a crazy week in politics. I think I say that every week though, Matt, right? It's been a crazy week, but with that, we got a lot to talk about. Midterms are Tuesday, and with that, on with the show. Welcome. I am your host, Fred Wellman. This is On Democracy with FP Wellman. Hope you're on the right flight. So glad to have you here for the show. This is the show we talk with smart people who are fighting for our democracy every day, across the country, even worldwide these days. This is the last episode before the midterms, and things are just nuts right now. Early voting is happening in many states. Down in Georgia, right here in Missouri, I myself voted yesterday here in beautiful Missouri. It was easy. Record turnouts all over the place. Us political types, we're hovering with the stats daily, right? Every poll that comes out is stressful. It's hard to tell the wheat from the chaff. Our friends in the polling world are getting beat up. Not my friend John Della Volpe. And, the polls are all over the place, and they've had a tough run these last few cycles. So I thought I'd get one of the best ones in. Many of us believe that the youth and women's votes will be absolutely critical in this post-Roe world, this first election after the post-Roe world. We saw what happened in Kansas, where expectations were far surpassed, and they voted down the attempt to peel abortion rights out of the Constitution, which surprised a lot of folks. So what does it mean for next week, right? Well, I have the privilege of knowing our guest for, God darn, like 15 years, I think, right, John? So, there's nobody in the country that knows the youth of our nation better and has studied them more in polling for the last few decades, literally decades, than John Della Volpe. So I wanted to take us into the midterms. Timing is everything, as it works. We were actually supposed to talk a couple weeks ago, and I got stuck in Georgia, but he just released the 44th edition of the Harvard Institute of Politics youth poll just last week, and man, it's full of good stuff. We're going to talk about it. So, John, welcome to the show. John Della Volpe is the director of polling at the Harvard Kennedy School Institute of Politics. He's the author of the book Fight, right here, How Gen Z is channeling their fear and passion to save America, published just earlier this year. Proud to have a copy of that. Washington Post referred to John as one of the world's leading authorities on global sentiment, opinion, and influence, especially among young Americans and in the age of the digital and social media. John's also the founder of SocialSphere, a great company, Cambridge, Massachusetts-based public opinions and analytics company. Appears regularly in MSNBC's Morning Joe. You were just there the other day, I believe, and his insights on the millennial generation and Gen Z are found in national media outlets in the U.S. and abroad, including The Daily Show with Trevor Noah. So, John, man, after all that, good to have you on the show, bro. I'm glad we could get you on here.
It is so great. It is so great to be with you, Fred. Thanks so much. And it's a real honor. I mean, you've had a tremendous kickoff of several shows, and to be perhaps the last word before the midterm election, I've been looking forward to it. So
me too. I'm thrilled. It's just great. John, I always ask everybody, how'd you get here? Right? I mean, a lot of us, I was here, I think when we met at Harvard in 2007, I was still a Republican. I was getting recruited for classes because they needed some token Republicans to go to classes. You've been doing this for a long time. How did you get your start looking at, I guess then, millennials and all that? You've been doing it for a couple of decades. Tell me your story.
Thanks, Fred. It's been so long that I actually started polling millennials before the generation even had a name, right?
Right.
It's right. It's like the 10,000 hour thing with Gladwell, right? You need to do two things, right? You need to learn your craft, but there's also this like element of like luck to things, right?
Right.
If Bill Gates didn't live near the University of Washington, wouldn't have access to the computer system that taught him how to code, et cetera, right? If I wasn't a pollster living in the Boston area, I'm not sure we'd be talking right now, right? But the story is, in the winter of 1999, after spending some time at the Institute of Politics or a variety of other projects, there were two undergraduates, Erin and Trevor, who I'm still connected with.
Wow.
asked their colleagues and staff at the IOP in those days to they want to do a survey, and they really were interested in understanding the seeming disconnect between volunteerism of community service and voting. They did their homework, and they realized that in the 1996 presidential election, only a third of young people participated.
Wow.
They said, doesn't our generation believe and understand that if we volunteer and we vote, we can kind of close the gap, meet the challenges that much faster.
Yeah.
So the IOP thought it was a good idea. There were basically three of us, I think, polling in Boston. I think I was probably the head of the top person to talk to before they got to K or H. And here I am 22 years later. It was a one semester project. It's a one semester project. And again, that was, 40 something semesters ago.
Yeah, I was going to say, because you just issued number 44, which is a lot of semesters. Right?
Yeah.
Wow. What a fantastic
and what's interesting about it is, right, we've seen like my business partner, Jonathan Chavez, who kind of came through the program.
Yep.
We've had a member of Congress, we've had a presidential candidate, Secretary Pete Buttigieg, work on this survey with me. So that's the best part of this. That's why I'm so confident in the survey every year, because it's not me. It used to be a 30 or 40 or 50 something year old asking questions. I'm just channeling the curiosity of our students,
wow.
and their connections to each other, their other, members of their generation and the country, and just trying to put a frame around that and to add some perspective. And that's what I try to do.
Wow, I love it. And I noticed, every semester there's actual current students who are part of the project and leading at each of the youth votes run by students. It's fantastic, and the results speak for themselves. It is the gold standard in youth polling. So I mean, let's kind of dig into that. I mean, it's I was digging through the latest results this week, and it's great. And by the way, for folks who are listening and watching, I'll post a link on the website, but I'm not sure what to think. It gives me this strange, I don't want to say this out loud, but feeling of optimism. I don't know. I think, the youth will save us, right? I mean, it is, there's some really wonderful stuff, and there's actually some interesting stuff you found. I've seen you on TV this week talking about it. You've seen some optimism, and, what are the key findings that leap out at you right away? And what should we be looking at that caught your eye right away?
I think that right away, the most important message here, Fred, is to debunk the old conventional wisdom, which says that young people don't vote.
Right.
Okay. If you were kind of a betting man in the 80s and the 90s and 2000s, you're probably going to be right more than you were going to be wrong in terms of kind of where that number was. Because when baby boomers, when Gen Xers, when millennials were of this voting age, under 30, they voted at roughly half the level that Gen Zers voted. Wow. Right? Between 1986 and 2014, the high watermark was 21% of young people voted in the midterm election. The low watermark was in 2014, it was 16%. Okay. So that's what we're dealing with. And what happened is Parkland, Trump, and a variety of other things, and what the combination of those events, and we'll talk about them more later, I think, in 2018, it doubled the participation rate of young people. Okay. Right. In our survey, young people generally overestimate the degree to which they'll vote.
Okay.
Okay. So if they say 40%, that usually translates like 33 to 35%. Okay. So, but that's been a constant over the course of the last couple of decades or so. Okay. The message, what I saw in this poll, what I saw in the spring poll actually, was even before Dobbs, there was a heightened interest in this election. Right. Dobbs only created more energy, and the same number of people in this survey indicate they will vote as was the case in 2018, wow. Of which we saw that record turnout. Okay, right. So I don't see anything in this data to indicate that we're going to take a giant step back, that this generation will be like others where they turn out once but never again. I don't see anything in this data to indicate that's a fact. So I think the headline was, we'll approach or even exceed this turnout figure from 18. Interestingly, those who live in battleground states are even more energized and even more likely to vote than those who live in predominantly red or predominantly blue states.
Yeah, I caught that. It seems there's a great enthusiasm. So we're hearing great, that all translates to enthusiasm, right? It's always the big word we have as campaign people is the enthusiasm of our voter base and getting them all out. I can't tell you how often I fight with people all the time. That's kind of scary. But, saying, well, there's more Dems registered than Republicans. I said, yeah, but they don't show up. It's about who shows up. It's just like right now in Ukraine, right? I use the same example. Yes, Ukraine's outnumbered by the Russians, but not in Kherson, right? Kherson, right? And that's the thing. You get your, if your enemy doesn't show up in the right place, you can win, and that's the case here. If we show up and we show up in the right numbers, we can win, whatever the registration numbers are, right? And so yeah, you said it looks like it's historic things, and by and what I also saw was like nearly 2-to-1 margin. Likely voters prefer a Democratic control of Congress, 57-31, and only 12% remain undecided. What does that say to you? So they are leaning Democratic, obviously.
Yeah, heavily. So that 60% threshold is a really important number, and that's kind of like the threshold to make to generally can make things to be an average to a good to a really great night.
Yeah,
for Democrats. Right. So for Democrats to be successful, they certainly need to push that 57 into the mid 60s, which I think they can.
Yeah.
For perspective, in 2018. Pew did the voter file validated survey, and they found that 70% of under 30s voted Democrat. 70%.
Wow.
Okay. The exit poll said it was closer to the mid 60s. Okay, but you're dealing mid 60s to 70%.
Yeah.
So that would be the high watermark. Trump literally on the ballot with the movement of Parkland. In 2020, different electorate, larger electorate, Biden on a national basis got 60%. So, and that was enough that 60% among young people, that 20-point margin was enough in those 5 battleground states to overcome the margin that Trump had among older citizens over the age of 45. So we need to get to 60, hopefully in the mid 60s if you're a Democrat.
Wow. And jumping ahead to some question I had later, do you think a lot that's helped by, we know Roe is motivating them. Do you think this recent thing with the marijuana issue, that's always been an issue with the Gen Zers, what the president did, at least the federal level, are these the right moves to make to motivate them more? And they'll, I mean, we're also facing the headwind of his popularity has dropped a bit, right?
Yeah. So going all the way back to like why we started this, which is this question about why do in most off-year elections and most midterm elections, more young people will literally volunteer in a meaningful way in their community than vote, right? If we're dealing with only 4 out of 5 staying home in typical years, not the case now. But so there's not apathy, but for America, it was just they didn't think their vote really mattered too much. Okay, right. So. And a predictor of the degree to which someone will vote is oftentimes can they see the tangible difference between voting or voting for one party over the other party. Okay, so I think partisanship works in 2 ways, right? The negative partisanship, right? The threat of what's on the other side. We're seeing that in a very tangible way, of course, with the Dobbs decision and other concerns in the future in terms of where that could lead around privacy on one hand. That's the negative part of this.
Yep.
In addition to healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. On the other side of that, there's a positive element of this, right? You're reminding young people that they voted in 2020 for a Democratic administration led by President Biden, who was going to do 3 or 4 specific things for them.
Yep.
Specific things, including addressing the student debt crisis.
Yep.
Check. Delivered. 1. Second is making progress for the first time in generations, on gun control, gun reform.
Yep.
Did that in a bipartisan way. Check. And then, of course, a significant investment in climate change. Okay, right. Those were, I took a leave from Harvard. I worked on that campaign. Those were among the specific reasons that young people voted in 2020. Those were the questions that I was being asked in 2021, 2022 by younger people saying, where are those things? That's why we turned out. So without question, adding marijuana onto that and a variety of other things, of course, in terms of, COVID relief and small businesses, et cetera, I think is a very, very strong record and will keep people engaged and involved in the system to show that you participate, you vote, you remind folks in Washington what you did and why you did it. You demand things back, and and this is politics. So I'm optimistic. Again, it's hard to disaggregate this, but I'm optimistic that the combination of the negative as well as the positive can and really kind of fuel some of this increasing levels of participation. I think we'll see.
And it's been a long time since any of the administrations can say specifically to, it was millennials before them and then Gen Z, here's the issues you wanted addressed. And in 2 years, they've addressed them. I mean, there really is no way to deny that they haven't made, I mean, if nothing else, even the effort, I think. I think past administrations didn't even make the efforts. I mean, to come at the student loan, to come at the climate change, those are very direct. There's no way you can ignore those. They did deliver, and at least tried to deliver, right?
Yeah, and by the way, Fred, the incredibly important investment in mental health resources, right? Is another thing. Again, it's not well known. It's not, you're not seeing this in the commercials. We can talk about that later, perhaps. But I have a hard time thinking about a more, youth-focused, youth-forward administration. Ironically, than President Biden in terms of what he has, what he's delivered. I'll tell you just an interesting kind of story. But generally, most years, we take a couple of our students to Washington, D.C., as you might know, and we kind of show them a little bit in terms of how a press rollout works, and they can take some questions. It's a learning experience. Yeah. We've been honored many times to brief members of different administrations, Obama administrations, members of Trump administration, et cetera. And we were honored that our students, members of our team, were able to brief this current White House administration. Wow. Surprisingly, as we were leaving, the president heard we were here in the White House, and he asked two of our students to stay back. He had a 30-minute direct conversation with young people, the president to our two students, engaging for, I think, a solid half hour about what was on their mind, what he needed to know, et cetera. We talked a lot. They talked a lot about climate. They talked a lot about mental health, anxiety, this feeling of being under threat. So again, not a lot of people appreciate this, but he truly is as connected to younger people, more connected to young people than I think many people appreciate.
As we sit here too, I think with the fact that he's married to a community college teacher, professor, right? I mean, you want to be connected to the youth of today. His wife, Dr. Biden, of course, is an instructor. She teaches this generation. She knows intimately their daily lives and what they're dealing with. It's a super secret we don't talk about enough. I think that the First Lady of the United States actually is directly involved in educating this next generation. So I think
it's a great point.
So also you said that, now I thought this was fascinating, more than 7 in 10 young Americans in this, 72%, believe the rights of others are under attack. 59% believe their own rights are under attack. How do you unpack that? In what way is that unpack?
So thanks for flagging that. So one of the more interesting findings in the last year, because I'm doing work, as you said earlier, outside of Harvard as well, but I did a survey that was part of a project we did for with Snapchat in late January of this year. And we looked at, several thousand 18 to 34-year-olds in that survey. And what we found was that concern about losing individual rights and freedoms was paramount, regardless of ideology, regardless of partisanship or political party. Okay. So this is well before Dobbs, well before the elite. There's this concern that America. So you have that is kind of in the air, in the environment, and then you also have, I think, these just like horrific attacks on members of the LGBT community. Right. You see rise of anti-Semitism, rise of racism, hate crimes, bullying, et cetera. Right. There's just a sense that individuals, for any variety of reasons, are just kind of feeling under attack. And I think that comes out loud and clear in this thing. Sadly, when we ask, do you feel under attack? You have over 70% of members of the LGBTQ community indicating that they feel under attack, Fred.
Wow.
And there's a direct correlation, okay, to that versus the mental health series of questions that we ask, where we also find that members of the LGBTQ community who feel under attack are significantly more likely to have thoughts of self-harm on a regular basis.
Right.
So this is serious business. I think that there are too many, we're seeing this play out today. We're seeing this play out this week from I think from the Pelosi story.
Yeah.
Scapegoating the other. And it hurts people. It has detrimental effects, not just to our politics, but sadly to individuals' lives.
Well, having raised a couple of Gen Zers, right? They are much more aware, I think, of, like you said, the others' rights, the attacks on others. They're much more aware, I think, than the generations I've seen before of others, as strange as that sounds. I think it plays out in these polls, but you do see it in the anger you see, and it is the anger. What we say a lot in my campaigns and others is these attack on trans kids, these attack on the genders, the bathrooms, and it's a mental health. It's an attack on their mental health. It's an attack on their lives, but it also affects others. It affects their allies and their peers. I think a lot of these older folks, they think they can attack they're just going after these kids, which is like 4 in most states, right? Like the girls' sports issues. But this generation is so pointedly aware of the equality that goes with it. I talked to my girlfriend's son quite a bit. He's a junior in high school, and that's when they have kids coming from out their bus out there to their district, and black kids, and they're a minority, right? And he's so hyper aware of the struggles they have. He's talked to me. He's come home angry, not for his own issues he's dealing with, but seeing how these other kids have been treated. It's a really interesting dynamic that this generation is a little bit different. I think that's exactly what you're seeing in this poll, right?
Exactly, and that's why, I think that's like the spirit of this generation, right? And years ago, when we would visit with them in town meetings, I would ask them, like, when you go into the voting booth, like, what are you thinking? Like, why? Like, who are you? What's your identity? Are you representing a party, an ideology, an issue when you're voting? And time after time after time, you hear, I'm voting for someone who's got less rights than I do, right? The DACA recipient, my great grandmother, so-and-so, right? From another state, right? Who all of a sudden lost her rights to control her own body, right? So I'm seeing that consistently, and that, among many things, is kind of what gives me hope. Many folks from the right, try to punch down and make cheap jokes at the expense of folks, who are more vulnerable, young people generally, but young people who are dealing with their own, identity in whichever way are among the most vulnerable in our society. So to think that they're often the topic of some, whatever, scoring a cheap political point is kind of sick.
Do you think that translates into anger? Like when you see a Ted Cruz, which you don't like to do because he's a beast. But you see Ted Cruz, who's, by the way, a podcaster now, not a senator. You see him on his ridiculous fucking podcast, talking about how these student loan debt reliefs is for that, that lazy barista, who with his 12, the smears that he attacks these kids. Do you think that their attacks actually make it more than even our generation? This generation is much more aware of those attacks. It's not just because it's them, it's their peers. I think we found out, something that the student loan debt forgiveness, I think it retires 40% or more of all Latino student debt, or some ridiculous number. Do you think they feel those attacks more than not just those kids, but as a whole generation, those attacks really fail, right?
Yeah, well, what's really interesting about this, a couple different points on this, right?
Yeah.
One is, Ted Cruz says these things because he knows that within a certain constituency, they're popular, right? He's hearing outside of his studio,
right?
Okay, let's hear more of this. Yeah. When I ask Americans, and I've done this several times, okay, to rate not just, the president or different institutions, but rate the impact that the silent generation has had on America, baby boomers, et cetera, okay? Just, kind of given the amount of time that they've had, how do you have favorable, unfavorable impressions of the following generations? Baby boomers routinely rate Gen Zers incredibly negatively, like 2-to-1 negative. They have a 1/3 approval rating or favorability rating of essentially their kids and their grandkids. Okay, a third. Now, what's interesting, despite the okay boomer, that's not necessarily reciprocated. Okay, so I'm not saying that Gen Zers like love the elder generation, but they certainly have more respect and certainly kind of a more balanced view of their contribution than than the parents and grandparents have, essentially kind of their own kids.
Wow.
And I'm at the point now where, listen, Fred, there's been no generation who has dealt with more trauma more quickly, okay, in their young lives before the average human brain is even fully mature in the age of about 25, according to neuroscience, than this generation of Gen Z, right? Ever since, relative in the last 70 years since the greatest generation.
Yeah.
Okay. And despite the trauma and the anxiety around the recession, around opioids, around school shootings, around climate change, I could go on. They could have withdrawn, they could have fled, but instead they leaned in to fight and to participate and to try to change things. I think it's quite remarkable.
And on that note, transitioning that, so, I had the privilege to go to the Congressional Black Caucus retreat in the summer with Marcus Flowers. And one of the interesting things that one of the gentlemen there said, Hakeem Jeffries said, he goes, one of the things we have to do better as Democrats is we always get bogged down in the issues, right? And he said, you have to remember that issues divide and feelings unite. And the Republicans have been very good at handling those issues, right? The emotions, the feelings. And unfortunately, that feeling is anger a lot, right? We see that a lot. Do you how can we do a better job of capturing the feeling? And I think you touched it in fight, is how do we as maybe political operatives and strategists and just average Americans, how do we do a better job of capturing, and I mean this very weirdly, but the feelings of Gen Z, so that we can motivate them? How do I pile on to, because it is easy to get bogged down in issues, and I know it turns people off. It's a weird question, but what do you think? How do we do a better job of capturing the feelings of the Gen Z and then providing them something they need, and then helping our candidates?
Yeah, it's a great question. And oftentimes, I love the way you ask that question, because oftentimes I'm asked it in like the opposite way, right? What's the message, okay, that's gonna like resonate, right? And that's the wrong way to ask the question, right? So the way in which kind of we think about it is basically kind of values, values, okay? Values trump the messenger, and the messenger trumps the message, okay? So you have to start first with values. And the way you do that is we don't talk about, the swing voter in X district, okay, is a 40-year-old male independent. No, he's a millennial. Okay, let's understand what his experience has been like based upon where he lives, right? He has a very different life experience than you and I do, okay, or a Gen Zer does. So we have to really think carefully about these experiences and why we think or why we feel the way that we do. We don't need to agree with this, okay, but we need at least to internalize it. I gave a talk at a similar get together, okay, on Capitol Hill earlier this year. And the one comment I made, I think, really kind of caught the room by surprise. I hadn't thought about it. I said that we're talking about Gen Z. At this point, they had voted twice, 18 and 20, much higher levels than anyone previously. And I said, this generation doesn't have a memory of America at our best when we were united. Okay, they don't remember 9/11. They certainly don't remember September 12th or September 13th. Right. With regardless of your partisanship, you hung the flag. Okay, they don't remember that. All of their experiences have been a bitterly divided country. That's the difference between a millennial and a Gen Z. A millennial will remember 9/12. A millennial will remember John McCain, on election night in 2008 as well. Right. This generation doesn't. Okay, so come understanding that. And then understanding, the 4 or 5 key parts of their upbringing that kind of connected this generation around systemic racism from Floyd, the climate strike with Greta, the Parkland strike, and the concern about guns from Parkland, the chaos of a Trump presidency. And the other thing I talk about in the book, which came to a surprise of many, is you got to understand like the drivers of Occupy Wall Street. They were young, but their first experience of politics is through this lens of inequality. Okay, so you got to tap into those feelings, Fred. That's how you start to have this conversation, relationship with young voters.
What an eye-opening thought. I mean, you're right. I'm so fortunate to be able to talk to you about these guys because I have the unique experience of having 4 kids. 2 are millennial, right? They're a little older, and then my 2 youngest are pure Gen Zers. They were 2 and 3 on 9/11. So you're right. They don't have those memories. They don't form memories till they're 4 or 5. It's a very important distinction because then we have their early memories of money is 2008's recession and 20 years of war, and it's really unique, formative experience. And it's funny how going back to something we said earlier, the callback to our boomers, right? Boomers remember World War II, right? They grew up after World War II. They don't actually, we forget boomers didn't live through World War II. Boomers didn't live through the Depression. I have a World War II dad, right? He lived through the Depression and World War II. And you see that right? Because the boomers ended up being what, hippie generation, Woodstock is boomer, right? I think we forget that. And so those are very different experiences. And that's just one generation apart, right? The World War II generation, like you said, the silent generation, the greatest generation versus the boomer, I think we've forgotten that divide that exists in those generations. And in our modern era, we're forgetting there's actually a divide probably even between, like you said, X, millennial. I never talk about X. We're forgotten. But, X, millennial, and then you're right, the Gen Z experience is so very unique. I think we ignored it at our peril, right, at this point. We fail to understand it at our peril. And that's what you get into a fight, right? That this motivation, you focus on some wonderful young, obviously David Hogan, others are very big in the book, what motivated them. I mean, we joke about these school shooter drills, but this is their life, right? I mean, it's a very different experience than what we experienced.
And it's difficult to a couple of observations. I do a tremendous amount of traveling and spending time in a variety of different settings, right?
Yeah.
And you can still feel, if you just ask them what's a good day, right? Ask them what's on their mind, what keeps them up at night. These are the questions that we can ask, in any sort of setting or focus group that quickly opens up these meaningful conversations. For example, let's take the issue of mental health for just as one issue. Okay, the Harvard research indicates that half of this generation feel more days than not over the last 2 weeks that they have had feelings of hopelessness, depression, or anxiety. Half of that number, 26%, say it's so bad that more times than not over the last couple of weeks, they've had serious thoughts of self-harm or suicide. 5% every single day, wow. Which means that in every high school, in every college, hopefully not in every middle school, but probably in every middle school, there's a handful, dozen or more of young people under so much, so the weight is so heavy on their shoulders. They're walking around the school thinking about ways to relieve that pain. Okay. And it doesn't take long to kind of feel that when they walk into a new classroom and they look around, window, okay, courtyard, door, right, window, right? What are my options here? Okay. These things don't, this is their first memory, of grade school in many cases, right? And that doesn't leave you very easily. So that's what it's just a very different experience than I think we have. And again, don't just take the survey data or what I say, look at the hard data, look at what the CDC says, right? That after this period of relative stability, we talk about this in the book, of deaths by suicide, among millennials, when the eldest member of this generation turned 13, 14, 15 years old, we see this 47% spike in deaths by suicide. It's the second leading death among young people. Right. So, and by the way, it's not just connected to all the traditional things that stress is connected to among younger people about academic life and personal relationships, social media, but the disquiet in our politics is adding even more stress to it. Right. It's exacerbated, by the way, when they are the target, of folks trying to score cheap political points, and right? Derision, it harms people. And derision, right? And it's you've known me long enough to know that I've had a mental health journey that I've been very public about. I went through challenges to my PTSD from war, and I really do. It's funny. We again, my personal experience. I got my cup here. It's the thing about this generation, and I used to talk with my mental health is PTSD especially gave me a cup that was already about 90% full, right? And when your cup is already 90% full, it takes a lot less to overflow it, right?
And it does what I hear you describing is we have a whole generation in many ways of kids who already are coming into the day with a cup that's half full already. Right. And I think we ignore that danger at our peril. Right. I mean, as parents and as policymakers, even more so, equally, I suppose. But I think that's what you just described to me. That's why I'm kind of nodding my head. I was like, yeah, that's how I used to describe my days, not just 3 or 4 years ago. I would start a day, even when we met at Harvard and I was dealing, I remember, I'm very open about it. I remember going to the mental health care there, and I told the lady I was having a hard time second semester, and she's like, well, let me tell you about your day. You're taking 8 classes a week or whatever at Harvard. Let's see, you're a fellow, and aren't you going back to war when you graduate? Yeah. She goes, okay. But now I take a kid, right? Like you said, that they've got the peril of knowing that school is actually a dangerous place for them, right? You start there, and it's interesting. I think we ignore these full cups of a younger generation at our peril. Not just as, like I said, as parents, but we as policymakers, or those who work with policymakers, need to understand what we're up against. It's really what a unique insight into that generation that you've been able to find. And in the book, I can't recommend it enough. Another poll you did recently talked about civics and schools for Gen Z. You had some interesting results there. Do you feel? I mean, I think I talk about a lot on the show, if you've seen it, is our institutions, the challenges our institutes are facing right now, the failures of our institutions to meet this moment like this, right? And I do you think our institutions, like the media, political party, schools, are understanding the needs of this generation and the concerns or outlooks? I mean, what are our institutions? First of all, what are the institutional failures, you think? And then what can we do and recommend to make sure we address these things?
Thank you. It's an important question. I think younger people don't believe they're being listened to. Okay. When we ask, the survey you're referring to is a back to school survey I did among members of Gen Z in high school. It was sponsored by Murmuration and the Walton Family Foundation, which is interested in empowering and lifting up young people. Okay. Yeah. So we really want to hear what their experience was. They believe their close friends get them, right? Their parents, their teachers are making a good effort. Okay. But administrators, elected officials locally or nationally are just completely disconnected in the minds of these young people, right? They're telling us not only are they concerned about life after high school, but they're concerned about sexual violence in their school, okay? They're concerned about school shootings. They're concerned about a variety of issues that most, I think, other adults don't really appreciate is in their mind, right? So there is a significant, I think, failure, frankly, right, of our specifically, I think, of our public institutions related to education around modernizing the curriculum and modernizing the experience to best prepare young people for life after, their public school experience. Number one, on one hand. On the other hand, anecdotally, as you said, I've been doing this now for a couple of decades, talking about my insights related to young people. And I have felt like, and of course, I'm sure there's a correlation with my book, but even where I'm invited to speak, there is a curiosity. And even where I'm going to a larger conference of which I'm just kind of one presenter, I just feel like there is such an interest in this generation by a variety of stakeholders that I didn't feel was really ever present during the conversation I had around millennials. Private sector, public sector, the media, I think that's government. I think that's a good thing. We have a long way to go. Yeah. I started talking about the mental health crisis 4 or 5 years ago. Now it's something that many more people are aware of, but I'm cautiously optimistic that some of the stakeholders are beginning to pay some attention.
Does the pandemic have something to do with that too? I think a lot of us as parents, having the kids home for a couple of years, the pandemic brought a lot of this home to us, right? And of course, we've seen the results of that. It does feel like we've all kind of come away from the pandemic saying, wow, this isn't working, right? So many parents became teachers. I mean, do you think, and by that same token though, so the reverse of that, John, I think about too, is the way that our schools have become political battlegrounds. Here where I live in Eureka, Eureka School District, Rockwood School District, excuse me, we've had these two people who are like the big anti-mask CRT people get elected to the school board. Our schools and their districts have become a battleground. The first act these ladies did, I say ladies generously, was to get rid of 4 programs that specifically supported the African-American students that I was mentioning earlier that are being, because they, quote, didn't serve all students. So our schools have become political battlegrounds in very direct ways. I feel danger there. Should I be worried?
You should be. You should be worried. I am worried because listen, it's we know what's happening, right? They there's a specific plan, right, to undermine the judiciary. There's a specific plan to undermine the legislatures, and there's a specific plan to undermine like our community schools, right? This is not an accident. Okay, this is not an accident. I am very concerned because what it also does is, and I spend a lot of time talking to people in these kinds of communities, right? Like, do you think it makes you more likely or less likely to have the average mom or dad to serve on the school board, right? Do you think it makes them who just wants to do the right thing, right? To whatever, to build a playground, right? Or to help provide some sort of instruction, right? It makes it more difficult for good people, who want to help everyone, help the community kind of share their skills and share their time, less likely to do so. So they're not, talked about on social media in ways which distorts the truth. But I will tell you two things that will be more optimistic. Okay. One of which is when it comes to education politics, and a lot of other elements of politics is younger people, whether they're Democrat or Republican, have more in common than we think. A younger Republican and a young Democrat have more in common in terms of the way in which they see school than a younger Republican and an older Republican, or a younger Democrat and an older Democrat. Okay. So on teacher unions, for example, okay, a young Republican doesn't really have anything against teacher unions. They've got like a more favorable than unfavorable view.
Right.
That's a Democratic issue. On the school choice, okay? A young Democrat doesn't have anything against school choice. They think it makes sense. We should have more choice in society, and they're aligned with a young Republican. An older Democrat not really into school choice so much. Right. So there's a lot of common ground, values-wise, among this younger generation of Gen Zers as well as millennials who are those parents, right? So outside of Harvard, I'm really trying to think about ways in which I can continue to kind of empower younger people to participate in these local elections for school board, because the far right sees this as an opportunity to kind of create more divisions, but it can't happen if the people who actually have kids in school vote, right? If they vote, it's not going to happen. So we have to promote that cause
at the local level. I love it. I like to end some optimism. I mean, it looks like, we're feeling good. I work with Voters Tomorrow, as you know, and a lot of our folks are promising, a big turnout for Jen, and that's what you're predicting. So we're 6 days out from the midterm, Jen. Should we see some optimism? I mean, I guess I should quick. The polls keep going back and forth, red wave, blue wave, whatever. But it does feel like they're not counting this Generation Z, right? That Gen Z is not necessarily being in those numbers. Should we be somewhat optimistic of those of us who want to see some change and see us hold the House and the Senate? Will Gen Z's? I guess what I'm asking, do you think Gen Z will save us? Will the youth save us, John?
Listen, we just talked about all the pressure and anxiety that Gen Z already.
Let's not add more, right?
And it's not really their job, right?
To save us.
So it's not really. I don't know if it's like their job to save, to do what we should have been doing, right? For the last 30 or 40 years. Okay. Right. Having said that, young people were literally the difference in Arizona presidential, in Michigan, in Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Joe Biden won those states by a point or less in some cases. Okay. He lost everybody over the age of 45. It's large numbers of folks under 30 that made that difference. Okay. Yeah. If Fetterman wins in Pennsylvania, okay, he will probably win 60+% of this under 30 vote. Okay. Wow. Young people will play a key role in that. I'm not saying that's going to be all of it, right? It's the most diverse generation, but that's going to be a big story. Now, so I would look for every one of these races, most of these races, Democrats are winning the millennials and Gen Z, and they're losing folks over 50. Yeah. So it's about mitigating the loss over 50, narrowing that, which Biden did a really good job of in 20 relative to 16, narrowing the gap among seniors, and then building up that base. But listen, I don't know. I don't see the data to indicate this is a wave election. Okay.
Right.
It's not going to be a red wave. All right. It's not going to be a blue wave. If there's any wave, it's a Gen Z wave. And the only thing I can tell you from all these polls I've been looking at, it's just really close. Right. Everything is just within the margin of error here.
Right.
And CBS poll, NBC polling, look at it over the course of the last year. We're the same place we were a year ago. 2 points. Republicans up by 2. Depends upon who turns out.
Yep.
And by the way, the last thing I'll tell you to leave you optimistic. Okay. Given the president's approval rating, given what history says about a first-term president, given the rate of inflation and this economic anxiety, for us to be even having a conversation about a close race,
right,
tells me that there's something potentially missing from this conversation. Okay. And that there could be this missing piece, and there very well could be an underrepresentation of younger people.
Well, that's fantastic. That's great. So with that, obviously we've got the book up front, Fight, available everywhere you get your favorite books, right? Doing very well. Where else can we find, I mean, what's current you're working on right now? You're working on a lot. You're always working on something. Where can we find you? What are you working on right now, John?
Too much. So I'm posting a lot on Twitter at Della Volpe. On day before the election, during the election, I'll be over at MSNBC doing that, which would be great. I appreciate that opportunity to be a contributor there around the book. We'll hopefully continue to do more of that. And just look, we're doing exit polling. We're doing a lot of qualitative that we'll be reporting through the media after the election to do a little bit of what did we learn as well. So
great. We're going to talk.
Don't play, but
talk more.
I really appreciate the opportunity to do all this.
Oh, thanks for joining us, John. I really appreciate it. Of course, all of our listeners and viewers, as always, I'm at FP Wellman on Twitter, still for now. I've also upped my game because shit got crazy. Posted, yeah. Shit got crazy lately, but that's okay. It's all good. I'm not going to buy my blue check, but whatever. Also, I'll emphasize my Instagram account now because FP Wellman Official. Everywhere else, right here on the show feed, on Democracy Pod, everywhere. Really pleased to have you guys join the show. Hope you'll like it, subscribe, leave a review, say nice things about John. He's got great hair. He's a great, smart guy. And John, thanks for your time. Thanks for joining us on the show. We'll be back again next week. I think we'll be remote next week, right, Matt? Because I'll be down in Georgia, hopefully hungover from the Tuesday night elections. And guys, I can't say it enough. Get out and vote. Get your friends to vote. Get your family to vote. Get your younger generation to vote. I've really been kicking my younger generation hard, telling them the stakes for kids that don't follow politics. I've been telling them what's at stake here for us, and we will see what happens. So with that, thanks for joining the show. We'll see you again next week.